I was very touched by Ezra's contribution, particularly the video. When I saw these living bridges, I had this feeling of exuberance and at the same time a feeling of sadness, profound sadness together. Exuberance because it was possible somewhere in the world to build these living bridges, both in the literal and metaphoric sense. And sad because I was left with the question, why don't we have a living bridge? How could it look here? And then suddenly between these two conflicting emotions, there was a third one, a kind of hope that perhaps this conference, which Sue and Gina put together, may be the first beginning of a living bridge. Perhaps the sowing of the seed of the tree from which the bridge will be fashioned in the future. Now, when I started to look at rivers, particularly the Swan Rivers, I was suddenly transported back to my own childhood, which was far away in Europe, in Austria to be precise, where lived just across the road a river called the Glan. And to this very moment, I can still remember the dark, briny, foamy, stinky liquid that poured through the Glan. It's something that has imprinted itself deeply on me. And it contrasts with another experience when my parents took me to Italy, which is very close where I come from. And we drove up the mountains, and there was the Gail, another river. And it was powerful, it was clear, it was cold. You put your hand in it and it almost bit you. And had a muscle, it was flexible, it was fresh. It was an amazing experience. And then crossing the mountains and going down into Italy, I remember this other river, the Tagliamento, totally different, running in flat rivulets in a broad riverbed, an intense turquoise, shimmering, shining. Rivers are different everywhere. They're powerful entities. And I've seen many in my life, but very little has prepared me when I came to Western Australia to see rivers here. I'm here since 15 years or so. And I remember my journey north, taking the inland route, stopping at the Gascoyne River, walking down to the trees and finding the river in patches, in little pools, a dark brown silent water stitched with dragonflies. Driving further north, I came across the Fortescue River. And again I stopped and I walked down in a totally dry riverbed, immersing myself in the absence of river. Though the river was strongly there. It was an exhilarating experience. There was no whatsoever water. I can remember the crunch of the pebbles and rocks beneath my shoes. Yet the river was there. It wasn't harmed, it was just absence. Further to Perth, I had the chance to experience the Moore River again and again. It's just an hour north. Now the Moore River is fairly similar to the Swan in vegetation. Perhaps we can find there the sort of situation that may have been here hundreds or 200 years ago. It's a very interesting river because it slowly rises and falls. I've been there often enough to see it break through its sandbar. It fills up, gains enough momentum and strength, and for a couple of days breaks its boundary to the sea, floods out, and then slowly negotiates its boundary again, seals itself off from the salt. Now if we come to the Swan River, which is really our theme, that river too once had a bar, a limestone bar, that helped it maintain its integrity, its immunity, if you like. It was a fresh water river. When O'Connor blasted that bar, the sea rushed in, overwhelmed it. In a certain way, this overwhelm of the river by the sea is a theme in Western Australian landscape. If you move further down to the Murray, to the Franklin, or the Denmark River, you will find the same thing. The rivers come up to the sea, and because they don't have the enormous power of other rivers, they let the sea come into inlets, and there they mix with the sea. Sometimes making a bath, sometimes not. I think I'd like us to reconsider the river again. Often when we think of the river, we think, this is the river out there. But for a moment, imagine the winter. Imagine the whole area of Perth and beyond, as far as the Swan River reaches. A vast territory. Think of the rain falling, endlessly falling, touching everything, every rock, every grain of sand going around it, slowly seeping through every bit of this earth, sometimes going up against the root system of trees and plants, but often going underground and then flowing, seeping into the river. Think for a moment and imagine the river, all this water, a confluence of all the experience, of all the watery experience that the land had, bearing the memory, every drop bearing the memory of the land. The river is more than a body of water. It is the confluence of all the water system, of all the ecology, of all the life of an area. The river is everything around it. And this horizontal river that we see is only part of a much greater river, to which also the vertical river belongs. Not just the rising of moist air and the forming of clouds, but every plant is a small river system in itself. Different here, say, from other rivers. Think of the Amazon for a moment, this powerful river that creates its own inland sweetwater sea in the great ocean, and how this reflects its whole ecological system. The powerful rainforest, moist, a huge metabolic activity, waters rising, damp, digesting everything, huge leaves evaporating moisture in the air. Think of a West Australian river. Think of the Swan, a thin river, hardly making it to the sea. Think how this river is reflected in the whole environment, in every plant. How every plant here is thin. Think of every plant as a fountain, as a watercourse. Think of a eucalypt tree. Yeah, it's thin in canopy, it's thin wax-covered leaves hanging down to avoid the heat and the sun at midday. How it holds everything together. Think of this as a picture of how water flows here. Think of a banksia with its serrated and sometimes deeply indented leaves, almost like a saw, very hardy, again holding the water in. Think of a grass tree with its long spikes, almost square, ending in a point. These are pictures of water flows. In this, the vertical river runs. This river is just a picture, is an expression, an articulation of the greater river in which we all exist. Everyone lives within the river. And what happens to this greater river, whatever happens to it, happens to us. We are wading it every day. We are sleeping in this greater river. Every tree we cut, every bushland we destroy affects this deeper river. The Swan River starts with trees in the wheat belt, or rather with the absence of trees in the wheat belt. We are within this river. And whatever happens to this river affects us. Nowadays, we are already living in a time when the statistical material is there to prove that just the number of trees in a certain area change the whole well-being, not just the psychic well-being, but the physical well-being of the inhabitants. Just a number of trees. We can rejoice about it. We have the insights to know that and perhaps weep about the fact that we need statistics to prove that. But think of the river as a mighty tree. You can turn the picture around. As the tree, as the water tree the tree reflecting all trees and all plants. And then the river becomes a picture, a reflection indeed. We talked about reflection of what we do to the environment now and in the past. It not only reflects Perth or the wonderful lights at night, it reflects all our doing in the greater river, in the big river. And, most importantly, while it is a reflector, it reflects us. We have to make another step, I believe. We have to come to the point where we can reflect the river. Not just think about it, but enlarge our mind, take in with our imagination the whole area, the greater river, the horizontal and the vertical river. Take in all the watercourses. Take in the whole situation and see this as the great river. And this greater river has to find its reflection in us. Not just by thinking, but by seeing it. And when we see this, when we can make a link, say, between a river that hardly makes it to the sea, that builds its own bar, and say the eucalypt blossom, that forgoes the bloom and makes a little cap to protect itself, the operculum. When we can make links between how the plants function here and how the rivers function here, when we can see these greater links in our imagination, visually, we can also start to feel. Not just the feelings we already have because we are attached to the river. We can apply our emotions in a cognitive way. We can sense the fragile economy and ecology of the river system. We can suddenly feel into the greater river and into this river and start to know what this river really needs. The collaboration we were talking about just earlier on. The sympathy we need to have with the greater river in order to manage the visible river. I believe in a kind of new ecology, a compassionate ecology, where feelings are not just involved or bystanders, but feelings are actively involved to cognize and see and know our environment. And what I heard today, by listening to you all, is that we are on the edge of such a breakthrough, of where our feelings become cognitive, a knowing, a collaboration, where our own borders start to dissolve. This will help the river to flow rightly again in its own course, and it will help our emotions, our mind, our feelings to start to flow again. The stagnant river, the poisoned river, the endangered river is a picture of the inner river, our own disconnection, our own stagnancy, our own inability to feel with and through feelings know our environment. And if we do that, and the more we do it, we come to the point where the river loses its abstraction, even this river. Where through the membranes of feelings, we come to know the river as an individuality, an entity, a being that we can indeed meet and collaborate with. And I believe this is the coming ecology, and that conferences like this are here to alert us to the possibility of a new collaboration with nature that is meaningful on both sides, so that the course that the river runs and the course that our civilization takes will be the same. Thank you.